So welcome to edition 2 of Testing Times. Today I have with me one of our employees, Isaac Rushworth. Good morning, Isaac.
Good morning.
Just tell me a little bit about you as an individual.
Well, that's always an awkward question, isn't it? So, I met you aged 5, maybe 6 years old through football. So, like all good dads, my dad forced me to go to Leeds United games absolutely religiously from a very young age. And we ended up sat next to each other. I must have been, 3 foot tall, hair down to about here. And then over time, we just got to know each other better and better. And then I grew up, I've got a good relationship with your son, and then started going to away games. Got to 18, went off to uni, had some spare time in the sort of like Christmas holiday period, and went, you got any work that needs doing? I'm free, I'm here to help. Came on, did, 4 weeks, 6 weeks maybe?
I think it might have been 6 weeks, yeah.
And was like, oh, this is quite good. I enjoy this. I find it more enjoyable than sort of a big corporate environment, and went, you got a job? And you're like, yeah. And then here we are, I guess.
Started good things. I think going back to the Leeds thing, obviously we had season tickets together in the East Stand, which was a family part. So my boy Louis is the same age as you, roughly speaking. You both had long hair. It's quite amusing. But you're right, in terms of building that relationship up, that's been a sort of a long time in its creation. So I think that's made me more comfortable around potentially allowing you to come and help us do what we're doing, and the things that you do for us now are significant in terms of where we're going. We're growing the business. We've got a really good sort of platform to move forward from. I think one of the things I want to ask you about, and I know you don't like talking about it, but it's about university, because you didn't just go to university, did you?
No. Well, I did just go to university, but yes, I went to Oxford University, which I guess carries a bit more of a thing with it, I guess.
It's a big thing. So tell me a little bit more about that then. So what did you do?
So I studied philosophy, politics and economics, which is the degree with probably the worst reputation in the country. So it pretty consistently churns out lots and lots of politicians, various prime ministers. I think almost every politician apart from one has been from Oxford, and then a decent amount have done my specific degree. So really a good sort of track towards being a very dislikable character, but I seem to have avoided that, at least for now, doing sort of some sustainability consulting instead.
What drove you towards choosing those as a degree, in terms of the fact that potentially you'd already kind of recognised that you didn't want to become a politician?
So I think I've always found politics interesting as just something to sort of engage with. Economics seemed to make sense for sort of job prospects, economics business. It's always going to be useful, generally quite a high paying route. And I think the philosophy part was just something that came with the degree. So I only had to do it for a year of the 3 years I was at uni. And it was like a nice sort of add-on. They didn't do just politics and economics. So it was just sort of, that was the complete package degree, and that's sort of what led me towards it. And it's one of those where most degrees, you can go into so many different fields afterwards, and because I've got 3 different parts, it felt like it was leaving enough doors open that I wasn't sort of shoehorned into a career, and that I could sort of be more indecisive, I guess. And
more choice.
Yeah, basically a lot more choice.
I think that the key thing from my perspective was that we'd had a previous guy working for us that had a degree in economics. That seemed to work quite well. Would you agree that the economics part of it fits better with what we're doing, or does it bear no resemblance?
I think the actual content of what you learn is not particularly relevant to what we do. So you're sitting there and you're learning about how the Bank of England changes its interest rates, which isn't sort of that important for working out carbon emissions. But I guess the concept around is being able to look at numbers, engage with them, think about them in the right way is going to be a useful skill in a lot of careers where you're going to need to be doing these kind of things. And that, yeah, definitely applies to what we do. So just the ability to think around how to do calculations is always going to be something useful.
So you head up our data analytics.
Yes.
Now. Yeah. So that's quite a big role for someone who's fresh from university. Do you feel the burden of that in any way, shape or form?
I feel something. I wouldn't call it a burden as such. I think I really enjoy the amount of variety that comes with the role. So I think compared to a lot of people my age, it isn't I'm doing one specific bit in a larger sort of organisation. It is anything in this entire sort of area comes under sort of my remit. And I think that makes it a lot more enjoyable day to day, because some days you're sitting there and it is just, okay, you've got to look at some Excel documents. And then other days it's a lot more sort of expansive. So you've got to, well, we've created a database with sort of 30, 40 million records in it now. And that creating that from the ground up is something that probably wouldn't be an opportunity I would have got elsewhere.
I think the work kind of unravelled itself. I think the opportunity became twofold from the point of view that we were stuck in a particular sort of routine of doing things. And you kind of came along and gave us a little bit more sort of aptitude around making it repeatable. You worked on an app, and that was for bringing things in from site. So that kind of like changed the pace of the business. But did you feel like, so we tried to write a role for you to sort of have as a pathway, but has that changed significantly from where we were when we originally sort of started the process?
Yeah, I think so. So I think in a small business that's growing rapidly, it's always going to be difficult to define a role and it be exactly that, because you just don't know what the future holds. I think especially with me being straight out of uni, there was also an element of I don't quite know what I'm capable of when taking academic skills and then applying them in a professional environment. So it was sort of, there was a gut instinct of me going, I will be able to think of something useful that I can do, and you looking at me going, I don't quite know what, but I think there's a value he can add here. And then we've just sort of worked it out as we've gone along. It's sort of opportunities that have come up, or sort of ideas, whatever it may be, to do things that wouldn't have been there originally because you just wouldn't have had the sort of confidence to go, yes, we can definitely do this. But sort of we've worked it out as we've gone along.
Well, we've done that before, and I think I will ask you questions. Now, what I've found with working with you is you've got a brutal amount of honesty, and I think the key is that if I ask you to do something and it's not possible, you'll tell me straight away. However, I never take no for an answer, and you know that. So the key is around then realistically repositioning that question. But what I've found is that you've got a very rapid way of being able to understand what's required as the front end. So I understand the back end stuff, and I'm not always the best at explaining it. But you then seem to be able to work off those sort of breadcrumbs and then come up with something that's the answer to the problem in the first instance. How does that work? How do we manage to do that? What does that feel like?
I think it's a combination of problem solving and self-belief. So I think it'd be very easy to look at some of these challenges and go, I don't know how to do this, so we can't do this. But if the attitude is, I don't know how to do this, but I know there is a way to do this, I just haven't worked it out yet.
Yeah.
And then it's just a case of working it out. So that varies on a case-by-case basis, but it is just sort of the same logic of, okay, somebody wants this, we can deliver it, we don't know how yet, but we will be able to get there, and then just working through what needs to be done, what's the end goal, where are we at, and then trying to take steps in between. And I think something that you probably don't realise as much is the amount of times I get it wrong. So I will go, okay, John needs this. Here's our way of doing it, because it's the first way I work out that will work. And then in 2 months' time, I'll look back and go, what was I thinking? This is awful. And then change it to make it better, quicker, more reliable, whatever it may be. And the sort of iterative process of, as you learn new things, you're able to go back and reevaluate it and go, okay, this worked just, but in fact it wasn't the best way of doing things, and then it sort of goes from there.
So that's constant reevaluation, but that's done via yourself, because I don't detect that all the time. I see that what we bring in mainly in almost every instance is a challenge. I'm able to kind of disseminate the kind of things that we're looking at so that it sounds a lot softer in terms of an opportunity, and then you're able to work off the back of that. But again, that's a pretty unique thing to have happened in a very short space of time. I think when you originally asked me to give you some work whilst you were off university, we got involved in some projects that were around evaluating solar at lots of sites, and you basically wrote the back end of what was required to do the reports. Again, what's the thinking behind that? How does that come about? Because we're doing it in a fashion that we've priced for that work to happen. It gets done in that specific way, and relatively speaking, we're all fairly happy. But you change the process. What goes through your mind at that particular point in terms of looking at that as a challenge?
Yeah, so I think there's sort of two elements to it. There's a sort of general willingness to just question things. So I don't want to say arrogance, but almost just not accepting what I've been told is the best way of doing things is the best way. And also just an odd desire to optimize. So it doesn't just apply at work. It's when I go home, I look at my cupboards and go like, oh, can I put a shelf in this so I can fit more cans in here to make the best use of it? And just constantly going round looking at things going, is this actually the best way of doing it? And I think in that instance, with how you were doing it on that first project, it was so apparent that the answer was no, that there is better ways of doing it.
Yeah.
And at that point, did I know how to do it? No, but I was aware that there would be a better way, and then it was a case of, okay, how do we go about doing this?
Yeah.
Because I think it was very easy to see that in any business scenario, if you can take any manual process and speed it up 10 times, it's so valuable.
I think that for us is major power to our elbow, and that's primarily the reason why in the last 3 years we've grown by 20% year on year. We continue to make decent profits, and we provide more services to more companies. So there's a certain amount of fuel behind all of that as a thing, and so we've embraced that. So the reason why we did it before was because we didn't know any better. The reason why we do it now is to improve our opportunity and to spread ourselves without being too thin across different things. What's been one of your major challenges in the last 18 months that you've been working for us?
So, as in a specific project, or just a general, like, more broader challenge that I sort of deal with?
I think we could talk about a specific project if it makes it easier and tangible. But I'm thinking that's probably it's a broader question.
There is always another problem, and it's never just maintain or stay still, and that it's as soon as you know how to do something, you very quickly get past it until you hit the next thing you don't know how to do.
Yeah, sure.
So there's so much time spent looking at things that you can't do, and it can be so demoralizing to just sit there and go, I know this can be done, I know it needs to be done, but it isn't done, and I don't know how to make it done.
Yeah.
And you can just sit there and sort of slam yourself into the same walls over and over again. And I think especially around things like sort of trying to speed up processes or things like that, you start to question whether it's actually worth the time invested. As you probably see this in the sense of time estimates on how long things should take. You'll go, okay, this thing, how long do you think you'll need? And the honest answer most of the time is, I don't have a clue, because if things go smoothly, it could take an hour.
Yeah.
But it's so hard to know how big of a roadblock you'll hit and how long it'll take you to get round it when you're doing something new. And then it's sort of so hard to gauge how long you need for things, and I think that can cause problems both from just an internal morale perspective and also a business perspective.
Yeah, sure.
Of estimating costs and time and sort of allocating resources and things.
I think I find ways of being able to communicate with you, which is relatively straightforward. So we had a project, so we'll talk about a project. We had a project with one of our longest serving clients recently, and I gave you the specification, which was the wrong thing to do, because what I should have done is distilled the specification and said, can we do this? However, what happened was, over a couple of emails, there was a spreadsheet that kind of came back of yes and no's. I went to site fully confident that I knew all of the yeses, but then also as well, because I would go to site and retrieve some more information to bring back more information around the no's, I was more confident that I could kind of do that in that scenario. Fact is now that realistically, from those no's, I've been able to hardline say we can't do this, and the client is in essence, when we know that there's an hard stop, and we're able to relay that to a client, they've got a decision to make. I think the thing is that when out of, say for instance, 12 of the individual components that were required to do that particular job, 2 of them were no, at a hard stop, they're quite happy with 10, because sometimes clients, and this comes from experience, ask for the world and realistically know that they're never going to get it. The smart ones amongst us basically go, right, well, I know I can go back and say no to certain things. And I think that's the same for you, and I think that will come with experience. I think those challenges that you have probably internally at this moment in time will also start to ebb away from the point of view that realistically that sometimes no is the right answer, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. We've already said that I'm one of those types of people who looks at something and says we can do that. You are very similar, but then you also have a hard stop, which is good.
Because I'm the one that has to actually then do it if we say we can.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so, but that level of communication again often takes years of being involved with each other and learning about each other's kind of idiosyncrasies in terms of being able to physically do something. Whether those things have been quicker because we knew each other and I've seen you grow up and such like, I don't know. We talk about osmosis in the office quite a lot, don't we? And I think potentially some of that is in there. I know we've had interesting conversations when we've been on trains to go and watch football matches about your career and how you were getting on at university, and it's like all of those things I remember, but I always remember as well that you were always more than capable of going on and doing whatever you wanted to do. To be fair, I think the key is now you're here, you're doing a fantastic job for us, and I think that all of those things that cause you issues now, they're not issues. It's easy to say when I'm at the back end of my career now. You know, I have a tendency of thinking that I know everything, which of course I don't, but to a customer I do. But the key is around that level of conversation and that level of confidence around what it does. I have to say, since you've joined the business, my level of confidence has probably gone up a couple of notches. But then that's a good thing. I think I want to talk about some of the things that you've done for the business, which you hadn't realised you could do. So I'm talking specifically about the solar monitoring, for instance. So off the back of a set of very extensive surveys we did for another customer, we came up with some fixes to a particular problem that span out into a massive piece of work, and then ultimately something that required fixing. Would you care to kind of delve into that a little bit for us?
Yeah, I think it's quite a big thing to try and cover. I guess in terms of data as a whole thing, whatever that may be, the more advanced you get around data and using it, the more it shifts from sort of Excel type things towards code.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as we did more and more things, it was originally, it was all in Excel, and then it was Excel with a little bit of code, and then it just continued moving towards that. And then with the solar monitoring, the goal was around extracting data from site, storing it, doing calculations with that, and then producing reports based on that information. And I think that was probably the biggest thing we've done that was entirely software and code based. So it was sort of a bit of a sort of step into the dark almost, in the sense of I nibbled around basic programming through some of the other stuff we'd done, but never something as extreme as that. And then it was, okay, the client wants this. Are we capable of doing it? And it goes back to what I was saying earlier, in that it's definitely possible to do this. How do we go about doing this? And it started off with me opening up a tab in Python and just starting, and it was terrible, and it took me so long to get the basics going, and then you go back and you change it, and you just keep doing that over and over again, and then setting up databases to store it all. And then I'm looking at the database creation tool and going, I've got no idea what I'm looking at here, and it takes me 6 hours to work out how to create a table, and then eventually that gets easier, and then it's just sort of going back over all of it again and again, going, okay, I didn't know what I was doing, I know slightly more now, what can I go back and change to make this better? So the first time we did it, it was almost a PDF that we already had, and that numbers were just sort of copied and pasted onto, because I got no idea how to sort of create PDFs. And then over time it was, okay, we've got the number bit down, what can we do in terms of making the PDF actually come from the code as well, rather than having it just already there and just dragging numbers into it. And it was, okay, can we now make the PDF different colours? Can we brand it for people? Can we automate it? Can we sort of make it so we can do 100 PDFs, 1,000 PDFs? Can we take it from different equipment? Can we take it from other things? And from there, it's just sort of expanded from trying to work out a solution to an individual client's problem to thousands and thousands of lines of code that I now feel much more confident looking at, going, okay, this is no longer sort of working it out as we go along. This is now professional. This is now a developed thing.
Yeah. I think we started with that process probably 12 months ago. We onboarded 10 clients with the hope that we could potentially move that forwards in spades. We now have somewhere in the region of around about 130 sites doing that same methodology. So that's opened up a different sort of marketplace for us. We're about to onboard a project in the States next month, which is the first bit of international business that we'll have done, other than the projects in Canada for the Dexma stuff, which again have come around in the last sort of couple of months. So I think the key is that we're moving in the right direction, and the whole angle is around that's been a great success story for us. I think if we kind of looked at that, what's next on the roadmap? What could we do next?
I think there is definitely a case of marketing it and learning more about what clients want, and sort of, I always feel like it's important to try and keep the direction very client focused on what people actually want and need, and not just driven by what we think is a good idea. I guess our hope is always going to be increase the number of sites, increase the size of sites, the sort of the geographical variation, keep expanding features. We can do more equipment, new equipment, and just continue to push what we've got in a direction that best suits what clients are looking for, and definitely just keeping it focused on, we've set out to achieve this goal of solving this problem, not we're just adding things that we think sound like great ideas.
I think the key is that we've followed our noses, and with the fact that we've had very good results means that we can probably use it as a position to kind of launch off the back of. Oh, that's very good. It's not the only thing that you've done though. So you've been involved in a few of the standards things that we've been doing, talking specifically about some of the stuff you've done on the carbon standards. That's been different as well.
Yeah, so I think that's probably more in line with what I would have anticipated I would be doing when I joined the company. So taking businesses through the process of working out their carbon footprint is very data driven. You're going to need all their bills, their mileage, you need to know the products they've bought, where they're going on their business trips, and just storing all that data, organising it and doing those calculations is sort of more data driven. And from there it has gone down the ISO standardization route, and sort of then it's about making sure it meets certain criteria and is professional. And that's been enjoyable. I think it makes a nice change of pace. I think one of the things I like most about my job is the fact that there is sort of days where I'll just sit and code, but also days where I'm just doing much more sort of data-driven stuff.
I think the key is that we have one happy client from that. I think the other side of that was I must have had that as a prospect for probably a couple of years. And whether times had changed and the significance of the UCAS accreditation became the galvanizer, or whether it was the fact that we could probably do it without thinking about it, it's kind of irrelevant to a certain extent. We facilitated it. We did a close-off meeting recently with the client, and we sat in the pub on the road from their office, and you waxed very lyrical about what you did one summer as a volunteer. If you could just briefly describe that for me, and then I've got a final question for you.
Oh dear. So that was, we were just having a nice lunch. I don't quite remember how it came up, but just one of the summers during university, I was just telling the tale of how I went to go teach English in Thailand. And I got dumped in the middle of the jungle, sort of 3 hours from the nearest city, in this village where I was the only English speaker. They gave me a little motorbike. I'd never ridden a motorbike before, but just hop on, and turns out it's not that difficult. And just taught some English, walked into the classroom each day, made it up as I went along, and it was good fun.
You're very modest, and I remember Natalie laughing her head off about all of this, and I found it very amusing. I found it more amusing that she were laughing at what you were saying, but the whole thing was kind of like a bizarre set of circumstances. And I think if you'd have looked back on it and kind of planned it out, it were kind of a little bit of a risk. My final question to you is, based on all of that, then, what's the most unusual thing you've ever eaten?
Oh dear. Yeah, I'd say the joy of that trip was that you weren't really aware of what you were eating. It was rice and some mysterious meat, I think. What that meat was, I dread to think.
Do we think we've eaten a rat?
Probably. I think. But yeah, not speaking the language and what you don't know doesn't hurt you. What I would say is it definitely wasn't a meat I'd ate before and it didn't taste too bad.
All things are equal at that particular point. Right, well, that's all we've got time for, Isaac. Thank you very much for your time. It's almost time to get back to work as well.
Yeah.
So
Thank you for
get
having
a
me.
wriggle on.
Cool.
Thank you.
Cheers.